Okay, members, we are quorate, so just declare this meeting open. Just remind members of their electronic devices should be switched off, excluding the tablet devices you're using to view your committee pack. Members, just a brief overview of today's business. The committee will receive a briefing from the department officials on the June monitoring round and mid-year estimates. And the department officials will also brief the committee on the summary of responses for the employment law consultation. Members' apologies. I've only apologies from Tom Buchanan. Is there any other apologies? Okay. If not, chairperson's business. Members, just could have your agreement that we publish all the responses to the committee's consultation on the Work and Families Bill on the committee website, so they're access to the public.
Yep. Great.
Okay. Thanks, members. Members, draft minutes. Draft minutes of our last meeting are at page 6 of your pack for the meeting on the 20th of May. I just have an agreement. Those are true record of that meeting. Okay, I'll sign them as being correct. Members' matters are arising out of the minutes are at page 15 of the packs. I've nothing substantive at the minute, just if we agree the action points from the last committee meeting. Content? Okay, members, moving on then, correspondence starts at page 19. Members, just to note, probably to realise that page 31 is correspondence from the Committee of the Office of the First and Deputy First Minister regarding proposal by the Northern NIO to make a 11.5% cut to the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission's budget for 2015-16. Members, as has been circulated to all committees, do we want to make a response or comment as a committee? Bronwyn or Fra?
I suppose, Chair, in anything that we do, we always have to come from a human rights point of view in this, so it does affect all committees, and it does seriously concern me that the NIO are cutting their budget, and it potentially could impact on our statutory duty as well, in terms of the committee responsibilities. So I think it's something that should concern everybody.
Alistair?
I would have thought it would have been more appropriate for a corporate response from the Assembly, if that's the view of the Assembly, rather than individual committees.
Right. Fra?
I think we all start at small beginnings. You know that there may be a corporate response from the Assembly, but I think each and every committee and every committee member has a right to put forward a point of view.
Yeah.
I think that an 11% cut in any budget is huge. Does it mean that there will be a loss of personnel? Does it mean that there are many issues that they will not be able to investigate or look into? And it may not be a bad idea we actually write to them and ask for how that type of cut in their budget will impact on their ability to deliver.
You'd be careful. It's the remit of our committee to do that, though, is it?
Members,
Human rights is the remit of everybody, Alistair.
members,
Yeah,
just as a
primary.
maybe come to a consensus between everybody, we've received the correspondence from the Committee for the Office of the First and Deputy First Minister. As a committee, if we sent our concerns to them and asked them to formulate a corporate response on behalf of the committees.
Yeah. Well, could we do that, but also write the NIO and say that we have certain concerns about the impact that this cut in the budget will have?
Members?
I would have.
The latter doesn't.
Well, I would have thought your suggestion would have probably been more appropriate. I would be much more comfortable with that. I just don't think it's appropriate for individual committees.
If we take it through the Office of the Committee of the Office of the First and Deputy First Minister in the first case, I know I'm not putting the pressure on you, Bronwyn, but you have, you sit on both committees, so you can make our feelings known through that.
Yeah, although I would prefer if it did come from the committee, because, like I said, in every committee that we sit on, we have to come from a human rights point of view, even when we are looking at bills and so on, so we do have that responsibility and obligation. And I would support Fra in writing to the NIO as well as, writing to OFM, DFM.
Members, there's two minds here. What's the rest of your thoughts? Pat? Write directly to NIO or OFM, DFM, the committee?
Both.
Both? Do both.
Is it the NIO or is it the Human Rights Commission as well?
The Human Rights Commission it's
To ask them
reserved.
what the effects are
You
going to
know.
be.
Yeah, it's not the NIO. Yeah.
Do you want us to write to the NIO or to the Human Rights Commissions?
No, to the NIO
The NIO.
and to the OFM, DFM till
But will NIO know what the impact is of the cut to the
They
Human
wouldn't
Rights
care.
Commission? Whereas the Human
They
Rights...
wouldn't care.
That's what I mean, the Human Rights Commission.
don't care, but we still need to express our concerns to the NIO. They don't care.
I don't see OFM's coming. Right, so,
Is there, it's
So procedurally, Chair, you know, the Northern Ireland office is something different. I would imagine procedurally, normally we go through the committees. Can we do a letter to the OFM, DFM committee,
well, that's what
asking for more detailed information on the effect that these cuts may have on the Human Rights Commission?
I think
What did you say, Brian?
that's what I was suggesting.
What myself and Fra is suggesting that we write to both
The
the
NIO.
NIO.
No,
and to the
I think procedurally we can do NIO, but the other procedure is we go through the OFM, DFM committee.
which we're suggesting.
That's the statutory
Yeah.
one as well.
I don't mind that.
Well, see, one of the things that you could be asking the NIO, have they done an assessment of the impact of a cut of this nature? Would have. You would like to think that they would have looked at the consequences of their actions in this.
I
And
suppose.
if their answer comes back saying, no, who takes up the fight with the NIO? Is it the individual committee or is it the committee for the office of First and Deputy First Minister collectively?
At the Assembly.
I know, Chair, the NIO have asked the Human Rights Commission to carry out an impact assessment out of their own budget,
Right.
which has already been cut. And if they don't do it, the NIO will do it for them. And I don't think
Right.
that's acceptable.
No.
Just to clarify, Chair, the Human Rights Commission haven't actually written to our committee, have they?
No.
No. So the only people we've been asked to respond to is the OFM, DFM committee.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I would have thought then that we respond to the OFM, DFM committee if members have concerns or points that they want to make. We have that in our letter back to OFM, DFM committee. I just don't think it's the remit of this committee to get involved in this kind of stuff. And you know, we can make an argument that all sorts of things impact upon the work of our committee, but if it's not the primary remit of our committee, we shouldn't be getting involved in it. We've been asked by OFM, DFM committee here, clearly taking the lead on this in the Assembly for the corporate body, and we should respond to them as they've requested.
Well, we could possibly look at it this way. That we rate the OFM, DFM reason, say we could push it to a vote on this here of people's concerns about a cut to the Human Rights Commission's budget. You know, see, I think human rights, and I understand what you're saying about other things. Human rights is a concern of every committee in here and every individual in here. And what we need to do is, if there's a commission set up to deal with people's rights, then we need to ensure that it's protected.
I think one of the things for us is coming is procedurally where we go. We've been contacted by the committee of the office and First and Deputy First Minister. Rather than us, I'm wary of us writing direct to NIO. If we write to the office of the First and Deputy First Minister and ask them to write to the NIO and copy us in on all their responses, rather than starting would that be?
Maybe a compromise.
That'd be cleaner, wouldn't it? I think that'd be
All
cleaner.
right.
Agreed.
Agreed, members?
Even the
Content?
NIO nothing's ever clean.
Thank goodness for that. I'm not going to raise any other correspondence, members.
Always watch compromise.
Members, that's the only parts I have in correspondence to discuss. Is there anything else any other members want to raise? Okay, members, if not, there's two invitations. Page 54 of the pack. The invitations are the chair to attend the lunch of the World Skills Squad UK selection competition, and also members to attend the University and Colleges Union AGM and conference. Members, the UCU's AGM and conference is on a meeting day. It's on a Wednesday.
Could we do a meeting there?
It's in the
Where is it?
University of Ulster Arts College.
I think that would be a good suggestion. We could also get a wee update from the college as well. University of Ulster. What's up?
18th should be that's the fortnight.
Is this McGee we're talking about? Or?
No, it's the Arts College.
York Street, Belfast.
With yourself.
What's the parking like?
What's the park?
The urn thing.
Dear.
18th. Members will try, but if not,
Conference that day as well. So we'll have
next month, the department.
Yes, I can.
We've a briefing in the NWRC action plan that day, members, so that
I'm
might,
sure they can find their way to the Arts College now.
it's usually one of our longer meetings.
Lauren is.
That
If we're agreed, I'll try and get it.
we'll ask and see, and let you know. Okay, members, draft forward work programme then is at page 57 of our packs. It's been scheduled up until the 2nd of July, members, so other briefings may be scheduled as they arise. Members, anything in the draft forward work programme? Agreed? Okay, members, moving on to our point 7 of our agenda is the departmental briefing on the June monitoring round. Just remind members this will be covered by Hansard, so your electronic devices should be switched off. John here.
Yes, oh yes, it's here.
Members, page 59 is the departmental briefing on the Dell financial position 2014. Page 67 is correspondence from the Committee of Finance and Personnel. And page 73 is the Northern Ireland main estimates 2014-15. I just welcome John. Go ahead.
Not even a chance.
Not even a chance to shut down. Morning, John. You're very welcome.
Good morning.
Over to you.
Okay, I'm here to brief you on the June monitoring position, which is due to be submitted to DFP tomorrow. You'll have received a briefing paper in your pack, and the Minister for Employment and Learning has obviously cleared this position. You'll be aware of the wider strategic context that the Executive, as usual, has overcommitted on the budget in 14-15, so that's the position that the Executive will be looking to manage as we go forward in the monitoring rounds. In terms of our own strategic context, in terms of the wider economy, the economy is showing signs of life again. The labour market is improving. The claimant count is down, 700 over last month. Ulster Bank Purchasing Managers Index is showing that consumer confidence continues to rise. But having said that, demand for our services continues to rise, continues to be strong, and that's shown through in our budgetary position. Section 4 of the paper sets out some technical adjustments that we need to submit to DFP in this monitoring round, and there are 6 outward budget transfers from this department to other departments which total 7.955 million, and they're detailed in the table. And then I'll go on to talk about the 10 inward budget transfers that we're due to receive from other departments, which total 7.737 million. In terms of the technical adjustments leaving the department, the first one is a small transfer for the Centre for Applied Learning e-Project Manager, which is our contribution to the cost of a project manager to take forward the e-learning project, which is all about promoting e-learning as opposed to classroom-based learning, and we're making a contribution towards that initiative. There's a small contribution of 42,000 to the Central Government Advertising Unit in OFM-DFM, and we make that transfer every year. Some depreciation on associated with refurbishment works in the Ballymena Careers Resource Centre, and that's to reflect the depreciation costs of that asset. Then we have a transfer into DFP of 5.2 million, which is our contribution to the Education Maintenance Allowances Review. Members may recall that as part of the tuitions fee settlement at the beginning of this budget, there was a commitment made by our Minister and the Minister for Education that we would jointly review the Education Maintenance Allowance. That was concluded a couple of years ago, but it's in the nature of the budgetary process that each year we just have to put in our savings back into DFP, and so that's a routine issue for us in June monitoring every year. We also make a contribution to Department of Health, who run the condition management programme for us, which is supporting people with health and disability conditions to self-manage within the workplace. Then we have a transfer to health for the Early Information Transformation Programme, which is equipping all parents within a cohort with skills to give their children the best start that they can in life. And there's also a contribution for the development of the new Belfast Intensive Family Support Project, and that's some 700,000 in 2014-15. They're the technical adjustments that are going out of the department. Then there's a table which shows technical transfers to be received. we have a small amount coming in respect of the HR Connect Service Management Office, corporate overheads in respect of the Occupational Health Service, a transfer in from DETI to the HE Support Fund, which is their contribution towards helping research and other businesses access research and development funding which is available from the EU, and that provides a signposting and an information service which is particularly relevant to this department because our two universities are big hitters in that regard, and they do draw down a significant amount of European funding to support their research and development. There's a small transfer in respect of European Social Fund technical assistance, which is used to help us close the old European Social Fund programme and prepare for the new one which begins in 2014. We have two significant contributions in from Department of Health, which is their contribution to medical and dental work students and also for additional student social work student places as well. And again, they're routine transfers that come in every year. We have a joint project with DSD on incapacity benefit modernisation programme, and DSD are contributing to the funding of some 58 staff, which is helping the IB migration project in the Ballymena and Andersonstown jobs and benefits offices. A small transfer in from DSD in respect of preparation for the Universal Credit ICT project, and also transferring from DFP in respect of the estate modernisation project to deliver a co-located employment service in the JBOs in Strabane, Downpatrick and North Belfast. They're the transfers in and out. Moving on to the overall position within the different divisions. As usual, our approach here is that we try to meet all our own pressures internally from within existing resources, and we only seek to bid to the executive where necessary, and that's the position that we've traditionally taken, and we optimise the flexibility that we have in the budgeting rules to enable us to do that. The big picture is that in the June round there are no resource or capital bids to submit to the executive this time. There are no reduced requirements either on capital or resource, and there is one function reallocation that we need executive approval for, and that's to set up the new Youth Policy and Strategy Division within the department, primarily to take forward the United Youth Programme, amongst other things. Paragraph 5.3 and onwards then give the position division by division. Skills and Industry Division, as you know, the bulk of that expenditure is in youth training, apprenticeships, NI, demand-led schemes, which means that it can be volatile and difficult to manage at times because we don't control totally the demand for those areas. But at this stage in the year, we can live within the resources that we have available to cover all of those schemes as planned. Moving on to Employment Service, which you'll be aware is the one area of the department that really reflects the prevailing economic conditions. And although the economy's recovering now, the demand for employment service programmes such as Steps to Work does remain high. We have enough budget to cover the demand for those programmes, and there is a budget transfer out of Employment Service into the new Youth Policy and Strategy Division, as I said, to take forward the United Youth Programme. There is a small pressure that Employment Service can't meet, which is on the Travel and Translation Service of 300,000, but there are resources available within the totality of the department's budget that we can offset to meet that, so there's no issue there. As I said, the new Youth Policy and Strategy Division, as well as the United Youth Programme, that division is set up to manage the outworkings of the reviews of apprenticeships and youth training, and also to take forward jointly with DETI the development of the economic inactivity strategy. And we've set aside some £2 million of baseline this year to set up that division and enable it to develop those programmes and start some pilot projects. Within Further Education Division, the budget is balanced, albeit there's a relatively small pressure of £500,000 on the expenditure that we incur with the Education and Library Board services, that again, we're able to meet that from within the totality of the budget available to the department. Moving on to higher education, which includes not only the grants to the higher education institutions, but student support costs. Overall, a small pressure of 300,000 on the budget for funding of the Open University, which we can meet from available resources. And finally, on strategy, European and employment relations divisions, corporate services and finance, relatively small budgets, and the expenditure will be managed, and there are no pressures or easements to declare there. Moving on to capital investment, we have a budget this year of 55.1 million, and the bulk of that is aimed at both the further education sector and the higher education sector. On higher education, there is an allocation of around 34 million in total, and that's really to continue our contribution to schemes that started in previous financial years, which span several financial years. And so we continue to contribute to live projects, including at Queen's, developments in their Faculty of Engineering and Health Sciences, at Coleraine campus within University of Ulster, a big development there, and estate refurbishment. Also a new scheme this year for Stranmillis University College to remove some asbestos and take some improvements forward on disability access and some refurbishment to their main building. And we're helping St Mary's University College install a biomass heating system. Turning to the further education sector, there is overall an allocation of around £20 million, and in 14-15 by far the single biggest investment is the continuation of the Performing Arts Technology and Innovation Centre at the South East Regional College in Bangor. And you'll recall that scheme actually began in the last financial year, and it continues into this year, and we're investing around 9 million this year in that. And then we've also got funding this year to commence, subject to the approval of satisfactory business cases, the design works for some significant new builds around the FE estate in Banbridge, Armagh, Enniskillen, Coleraine and Springtown, as well as an allocation for smaller minor works across the sector. Those two, higher education and further education, as I said, really take up the vast bulk of the budget, and we hold about £1 million for smaller departmental IT projects and also for funding of our other NDPBs. At this stage, the capital budget is balanced. We have enough resources to continue the projects that we want to do this year, and we expect that we can live within the resources available at this stage. So that really is a quick overview of the June monitoring position.
Okay, thanks, John. Of course, it's good to hear you're balancing your budget, as always. In the June monitoring round, I note the department is still funding the condition management programme as administered by the Department of Health. Has the department decided yet whether that programme is going to continue or not, or there's going to be any changes to it?
No, I don't think a final decision's made on that, and we're putting the budget cover across to health this year, and that will allow it to continue for at least 2014-15.
And is the Department of Employment and Learning that's meeting the full costs of that now?
Yeah, we meet the costs of that, and it's delivered by DHS, SPS and trusts on our behalf.
Okay. Moving on just onto the estimates then, John, the 18 million reduction. You haven't done that, you haven't gone on to that yet? No? You want to go on to that, or?
Let these ask questions.
All right, okay. I'm just getting ahead of myself here. The depreciation then on Lennon Hall Street in Ballymena. Of all the assets you own, why are you only showing a depreciation in that one?
Well, we depreciate all of the assets that we own. This is a non-cash charge to reflect the fact that over time, buildings and equipment depreciate in value. When you refurbish assets and invest in them, that increases their value, which means that you have to adjust your depreciation charge accordingly. And what that is there is to reflect the fact that we've refurbished Ballymena Careers Resource Centre and the depreciation charges have gone up. Now, because they're non-cash charges, it doesn't mean that another spending programme has to be reduced to enable us to meet that cost. It's non-cash, and we couldn't use that budget elsewhere to fund spending areas. So it's a routine matter.
Okay. 5.12, the 20 million then in the further education sector. Significant builds, Bridge, Armagh, Enniskillen, Coleraine and Springtown. You say subject to business cases. Where's those business cases at for those, do you know?
Subject to business cases, that's correct. A number of them are already with the department, and the likes of the Southern Regional College is down with DFP, and we're engaging with that department on queries. We await other business cases from the colleges, but we know that they're being actively worked on, and we expect that during the course of this financial year, those business cases will come through, will be approved, and enable these design works to begin.
Okay, Rob?
Sure, just a couple of points. It says that there'll be a transfer of 500,000 from employment services to the United Youth Programme. Given you read that there has been some changes upwards in terms of employment, but there's still a serious problem with youth employment. How will that impact on the ability of the employment services to be able to deliver a full programme?
It won't impact on their ability. What we're doing here is we're setting up the division, and the 500,000 is to cover primarily staff costs. And these are staff that were in employment service division that have moved across to set up the new division. So there's no impact on that.
No impact at all. And see, when you mentioned the migration of IB across and Ballymena and Andersonstown, what does that mean?
Staff in Ballymena and the Andersonstown Jobs and Benefits officers have transferred over from DSD to this department, and DSD held the budget for their salaries, and so this is just the transfer of that budget because they're now on our payroll.
How many staff are you talking about?
58.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, Pat?
Yeah, thanks very much, John. In terms of, you talked the new youth unit being set up. It was the first, it's not referenced in the briefing paper, but the economic inactivity, you referred to them when you were speaking. Is there an allocation of money towards that now? Or is that just generalising money being set aside?
The economic inactivity strategy doesn't have a budget yet, because other than the costs of the staff to develop the strategy, once the strategy is developed, then we'll need to assess what we need to implement whatever actions come out of that.
Okay. Just on a separate one, in terms of, is there any financial implications as a result of the review of MASN within the budget lines now?
Not as part of June monitoring. I'm not aware of any wider issues to do with it at this stage.
Yeah, final question then. You said there was no capital bids. Was there not a capital bid, maybe not on the rounds, but for a new teaching centre at McGee College?
That's not in our capital programme for 14-15.
But you would be aware of the bid?
I'm not aware of the detail on it. It will be subject to the usual business case being submitted by UU to the department, and we would need to try and find resources to fund that if the business case passed muster.
Thank
Okay, Alistair?
Just very quickly, what degree of scenario planning has gone on within the department in case welfare reform doesn't go through, and the impact that will have on the budget within the department?
Yeah, as you know, there is the issue with welfare reform, and Treasury on record about penalties that they will apply to the block budget. At this stage, the executive hasn't decided whether it will ask departments to make any reductions to cover that cost, or whether it can be made in year. So we're doing some internal scenario planning just in case, but at this stage it's nothing more than looking at scenarios and what we might do.
And it was suggested last month that there may be a 1.5% decrease in budgets from all departments. If that was to happen, what would that look like? I mean, what work that is committed to at the moment may be under jeopardy if that was to come to pass?
If I think the 1.5% is the Finance Minister's assessment of what it would take, yes. If that was levied equally across all departments, the impact on this department would be a reduction of just under £12 million on resource. That's 1.5% of our resource del.
Okay. Thanks.
Sally?
Thank you, Chair. John, thanks for your presentation so far. You mentioned that there'd be no capital bids. I know there's an existing baseline of 55.1 million at 5.10 about the capital investment. There's money allocated to both Stranmillis University College and St Mary's. And will this just proceed? Obviously there's a review of future training in Northern Ireland. Will this just proceed that this work will be carried out, never mind what the outcome of that review is?
Well, particularly for Stranmillis, there's asbestos in part of that, so there's obviously an obligation to do that. But yes, we're proceeding to invest and not preempting out the outcome of any review. The works need to be done. Cases have been made that there's an urgent need for this kind of work. There's electrical wiring works need to be done in Stranmillis main building, so it needs to be done.
Yeah.
Irrespective.
Okay, thanks so much.
Fra?
Yeah, it's just on the back of the question that Alistair asked in terms of welfare reform and preparations, which is also be factored or featuring in when you look at that, the upwards of possible £500 million of cuts to people's benefits and the impact that that'll have on those most in need in society. Would that be featured into, given that Dale has a frontline service with the benefits offices?
Well, I think we just need to wait and see what the executive decides to do on these, and then react once we know what the decisions are.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, John, main estimates then?
Okay. And what was the question?
What about them?
Do you want to go on to them then, or just want to?
Any slippage?
Okay. Yeah, I'm aware that you've been circulated a paper by the DFP committee in respect of the main estimates 2014-15 and the budget number 2 bill. This comes round every year at this time. The issue here is that the supply, the 14-15 main estimates and the supply bill really puts in place the legal authority for departments to spend their budget. You'll recall back in February there's the vote on account in the Assembly which gives departments an allocation of up to 45% of their incoming year's budget. So the budget bill number 2 really completes the loop on that and gives the full authority to spend. And it's about putting the funding, the right amount of funding in the right place at the right time to enable departments to fund their business objectives, and gives that important element of accountability and scrutiny to the Assembly. The bill itself makes provision for the cash and the resources that will be available to departments to carry out their business. And as I said, it gives departments the legal authority to spend. It's important to know that estimates themselves are limits, they are not targets. The target is essentially the budget, and whilst the estimate and the budgets are separate things, they are reconcilable. For example, the main differences being that in terms of the estimates, that is to do with the departmental resources, whereas the budget covers the department plus non-departmental public bodies. The table in the back of the paper that the DFP committee gave to you set out how each individual department's headline budget has moved from the Budget 2010 document to today, and you'll see in there reflected various decisions that the executive made after the original budget 2010 was agreed, where they agreed additional resources to departments. So for this department, you will see additions in respect of the Economy and Jobs Initiative, the outworkings of the tuition fee settlement, the capital review exercise which the executive carried out last September, and the additional money that was given to the department for the youth employment scheme and pathways to work. There's also a reflection in there of the additional resources that we got from Treasury when the FE colleges and Stranmillis University College and St Mary's were reclassified by the ONS as being NDPBs, and that needed some additional budget cover to be given to the department. So I understand that the main Assembly debate is on the 9th of June, and the briefing's there to help inform that position for you.
So of the summary table you're talking about, the 55.8 million additional resource allocation is mainly from the NDBP change of status, or is...
The 55.8, yeah. Primarily, some 27.8 million of that was to do with the reclassification of FE colleges and the HEIs as NDPBs, and that really is to cover, firstly, depreciation. Before they were NDPBs, depreciation on their assets didn't score in the department's budget. Now it does. So, unfortunately, it's non-cash depreciation, so it doesn't really enable us to do anything more. We also got budget cover to allow the colleges to spend their accumulated cash reserves, because one of the other implications of NDPB status is that an NDPB that wants to spend accumulated reserves needs the equivalent budget cover from the department to enable it to do so. So we submitted a bid to Treasury and that came through. Other allocations, as I said, there was 19.6 million in 14-15 for the Youth Employment Scheme and Pathways to Work, 15.2 million for the Economy and Jobs Initiative, and 21 million for tuition fees.
And then the 18 million reduction?
The 18 million reduction is on capital. Again, for the NDPB initial adoption of NDPB status in the FE sector, we bid for some 28 million of capital spending power to cover the anticipated spend by the colleges of their cash reserves. Because the settlement that we got from Treasury only covered the 3 years of this budget period, and we knew pretty soon after we got that allocation through that we wouldn't actually need the full 28 million within this budget period, because we needed to spread it out along the lines of when the time frame for the actual capital investments were going to take place. So we worked with DFP and we agreed that we would give back to the block 18 million in 14-15 in return for 18 million when we need it in future financial years, and we expect that to be made good when we bid for 15-16 and 16-17 budget rounds.
So that 18
so it's really it's a rephasing of resources that's available to the sector.
Just on the same table, transfer with ROI GB departments, 29 million a resource and 28 a capital. What's the breakdown or make up of that?
Well, let me see. Unfortunately, DFP didn't furnish us with the full detail to that table. And it's not... No, I'll need to get back to you on that one, because I'm not quite sure what that comprises. But we do have a full reconciliation back in the department, and I can get that to you.
Pat?
I want to come back to an earlier question I raised in respect of capital bids. University of Ulster made 5 bids, presumably last year. Of 2 of them were approved, one for 36 million Belfast, one for 6 million Coleraine, and there was a 10 million bid for the teaching unit block at McGee. Where is that in the system? Has that been now just completely disapproved of? Is it on the radar, or where is it?
This was the bid that we put forward under the Building United Communities initiative, if I recall correctly, last September, October time. We submitted those bids. Treasury are taking the lead with the Northern Ireland office on those. They've got quite a strict definition of what will actually qualify for that funding, and at this stage we don't believe that that will have been successful in that bidding round.
Right, so to enable me, could you supply me with further information on where it was in the system? And for example, was it prioritised in terms of a list that University of Ulster had supplied to the department? I'm not sure, you're saying it was on Greater Belfast Development, got 35 million approved, which came from some OFM, DFM and through Strategic Investment Board?
Yes, that 35 million was what's called financial transactions capital money, which was a new capital funding stream made available to the executive from Treasury to enable departments to provide assistance to private organisations in the form of bonds or loans to help them carry out capital works. For that particular scheme, we worked with UU on their Greater Belfast Development Project. It fitted the criteria. The executive decided that it would make the money available for that project, and that's why that was funded. So we have a scheme to invest 35 million there with UU to help them move from Jordanstown into the city centre.
I'm just trying to definitively find out where the bid from you in respect to the teaching block.
I can come back to you on that.
If you could, please.
I will do.
Thank you very much.
Members, anybody else? If not, John, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, members, just moving on then to our next point of business is a departmental briefing on the summary of responses on the law consultation. Members, these start at page 91 through to, I think it's 220 of your packs. I just welcome Tom Evans, Deputy Director, Strategy European and Employment Relations Division, and Dr. Alan Scott, Employment Relations Policy and Legislation Branch. Tom, Alan, over to you. I think we might break it down into chunks if you don't mind.
I was going to suggest that, Chair. It was in my script, but thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to come on. Jerry, you have a fairly detailed document that we provided in your packs, and that sets out the responses to the consultation on the employment law that closed last November. I mean, we had 42 responses, most of them very, very detailed responses on all aspects of it. And the consultation covered two of the themes of the employment law, the early resolution of disputes and better regulation measures. And the Minister wanted us to come along today to provide the paper and to come along and give you a sense of what consultees were saying, and also to offer the committee an opportunity to comment on the policy options that are set out in the paper, and obviously members will have their own questions for clarification. It is a detailed paper, and what I would propose to do is to go through each of the main elements and stop at that stage, and Alan and I then can take questions, and then we can move on to the next stage. Okay. The first theme is around the early resolution of disputes, and really that was about creating the environment that encourages greater numbers of disputes to be resolved at an early stage without the need to go to a costly and often time-consuming tribunal proceeding. In terms of the main proposal that was consulted on was to move to creating an early conciliation service where actually all prospective claimants to tribunal would have to route their claims through the LRA, where they would then be offered the service of the LRA. And just some of the sense of some of the general responses to the various questions. What has come out is that the LRA continues to be highly valued by all aspects of the employment relations stakeholder community, by employers, employees, and the representative bodies. A high volume of the response indicated that the early resolution of disputes and resolve them before to go through is a key issue for respondents and a key priority, and they see it as a positive. In terms of the proposal to establish this early conciliation service where potential claims would go to the LRA, there was overall support from the consultees for this, and the sort of reasons that that were given is the potential to avoid unnecessary tribunal cases, speedier and less costly resolution of disputes, and also the opportunity to repair the employment relationship, which I think in earlier presentations that the sort of opportunity costs around that are of concern. In terms of the concerns around it, this proposal is wary about introducing extra layers of bureaucracy, delaying tribunal proceedings for some people who are really keen to move forward, the possibility of satellite litigation, and also what should be recorded on an application for early conciliation, and what would go on the certificate that the LRA would then issue following the process of offering early conciliation or after that conciliation process had happened, and also impact on tribunal time limits. But I would say those concerns were more detailed about the operation of it. Really, I suppose, signalling up is if that service was to be introduced, that the model that would be delivered should ensure that doesn't happen. The reality of it is actually this service is already in place from May of this year in the rest of the UK, and at the end of the LRA, in anticipation of whether this might happen, is at least looking at that and starting to look at those particular issues. A vast majority of the respondents favoured a stop-the-clock mechanism, which would avoid that issue about concerns about the impact on tribunal time limits. But in terms of the administrative elements and any concerns, most of the consultees did say that's something for the LRA to deal with. If they were delivering the service, they should put in place the systems to avoid that. The second element of the early resolution was a proposal to introduce a neutral assessment process, which was very much about both potential claimants and respondents in the tribunal getting some sense from an independent person from the LRA, particularly probably from one of the LRA's arbitrators, about the respective merits of the case, with a view to them at least having an informed position about where they want to go next. Consultees were supportive of it, said it could reduce tribunal cases by bringing reality to both the employer and the employee. It would assist unrepresented claimants, and it could create a more realistic expectation of outcomes. In earlier consultations, the suggestion is that some claimants had an unrealistic expectation of what might, even if they won their case, and similarly from employers about the relative costs bringing that reality to bear. But also there would be reduced costs. However, there were concerns, or at least some reservations about how this would operate. I think in general, it's a new concept, and probably I think some consultees were saying we'd need to know more about it, and having been to some, we organised some consultation events that came out of that process as well. And people said, yeah, it sounds good, but we'd need to know more about it. Some concerns about the implications of independence. If it was to be delivered by LRA conciliators, you might be saying to an employee, you've got a good case against your employer, or vice versa, a weak case, that it could compromise the very valued independence. So that's why I think the proposal it'd probably be delivered by the LRA arbitrators who are there to make decisions. It could add additional layer of bureaucracy, questionable value if the individual assessment wasn't binding, and it could be a distraction from conciliation, and those were some of the concerns. Moving on to some of the more general issues about strengthening employment relations, again we asked some questions coming out of an earlier piece of research we did on looking at what SMEs needed, because I think even the committee here has regularly said, how are we dealing with the needs of small and medium-sized and particularly micro-employers? Again, there was very strong references to the positive role of the LRA in delivering service to SMEs. Of those who responded, some expressed support for a subsidised mediation service, again to be delivered or managed by the LRA. That's the sort of the overview of it, Chair. In terms of coming out of of all of that, we've set out a range of policy options, if you want me just to go through those. The first, obviously, is whether we move to introduce a new early conciliation service or retain the existing arrangements. Within the existing arrangements, we developed, coming out of our earlier review a number of years ago, a pre-claim conciliation service, which is very much about the LRA being proactive through their helpline and identifying cases that could benefit from early resolution, and the early conciliation service would build on that practice. Another policy option would be to restrict the early conciliation to specified jurisdictions. Obviously, there are some areas where it may not be. If somebody was complaining of some sort of harassment, could be physical or emotional or whatever, this may not be suitable. So again, that was something that is an option that might need to be looked at. In terms of the neutral assessment, is to introduce it or to pilot it in the first instance. And I know some stakeholders have said the LRA support a roundtable forum of external stakeholders covering both employer bodies and union bodies, who I think indicated that it might be useful to test this out, road test it before you would move to full implementation. Another option is actually to postpone it until, if you introduce early conciliation, will it have an appreciable additional positive impact, and you may not need the service of neutral assessment. And a final option, and we were just trying to explore all the options for the benefit of the committee and the benefit of the minister in any decision you take, is to postpone again the neutral assessment until the LRA's current statutory arbitration scheme has been reviewed and the minister's given a commitment, and that's something we're going to be developing terms of reference over the summer period with the LRA, with a view to looking to see how that service has worked. So that was in terms of the early conciliation and in terms of the neutral assessment proposal. On the other, more embedding good practice, the option is to trial a support scheme which would help SMEs develop robust systems to discharge their responsibilities as an employer. Also, another option is to trial a scheme that would provide SMEs with access to a free or subsidised mediation support service, and there has been a pilot in GB over the last number of years in that. LRA to target more specifically SMEs with their support services, and a final one, which is LRA to proactively target respondents after a tribunal hearing, particularly where an employer a tribunal is found in favour of an employee against an employer, about actually going back to the employer and saying there may be some procedural and operational weaknesses with your current systems and we might be able to help. And so that was another option. Chair, I want to stop there. That's quite a lot of ground, and those are the sort of general responses to those parts of the consultation and the options that we think should be explored.
Tom, suppose just in a generality, not specific in this, of the various policy options you've put forward to us, what's the next step and when will that happen? Who will distill down those policy options?
I mean, the minister's view was that we should come today to talk to you about this, and this is a part of I suppose, an iterative process and part of the consultation. The minister obviously then, following whatever the committee feels on the range of proposals, he then needs to take stock in that with a view to taking a paper to the executive, setting that out. So it would be very much about what the consultation has generated, were the weight of argument in terms of the consultation responses, and again the minister was keen to understand whether the committee had a particular view on any of the options. I recognise that there's a lot of options there, but the committee might want to express a view on only a small. I mean, it's not here to blitz you with options, but I think it's reasonable that we explore all the options. And as I say, the minister would be keen, I think, to go to the executive with a paper, hopefully before the summer recess, at least to put it into the system, because the reality of it is, with some of what the proposals that are in the consultation, some would require primary legislation and an employment bill. So it's about making preparation and lead-in time, and conscious that we have 2 years left of the current mandate, and it's to ensure that the good work isn't lost by a bill falling because of time constraints. So it's very much about that, Chair.
In regards to the responsibility or the input of LRA seems to be increasing. Their response, I think, is 2.30. They come out with a different model, and it's in respect to an option in respect of exemption is to exclude other categories of claim which are unlikely to settle in 4 weeks, e.g. discrimination claims. How did that fit into your thinking?
Well, I think there are certain claims that are generally believed to be settled more easily, where there's an issue at stake that it may be money owed or something fairly simple. Whereas a discrimination claim, there may be facts to be established, there may be fundamental disagreements about how people view the situation, and it may be deemed that that is something that the LRA wouldn't be able to easily resolve or get to the bottom of within a short 4-week period. And of course, the objective is not to slow up the tribunal process, and we don't want to be delaying it for as long as it takes to resolve that case. So one option would be that such cases wouldn't be included within this scheme, and that they would just proceed as they do now to the tribunal system straight away, with the LRA of course continuing to offer conciliation as that proceeds. But for the more simple cases to feed in straight to the LRA, because there's a greater possibility for them to be resolved within a 4-week period.
And the counter-argument, Chairman, that would be that actually some people who haven't discriminated would say, are they being discriminated or not? But the reality is, you could either introduce it wouldn't stop people actually still seeking the LRA services. It's just they wouldn't be forced, and it is an option.
In regards to neutral assessment, I think one of your options is to serve as a pilot area. How do you pilot that by geographical area, by sector, by employee?
It's something we haven't, and I suppose at least we're saying we're having some grand planning behind this. I mean, neutral assessment, I suppose it would be based on need. I think the reality of it, with something new like that, it would be for the LRA, because they would be delivering the pilot, to come up with a proposal how they might deliver that. But it would be very much about promoting it and promoting over a period of time. And I suppose the question with the pilot is looking at what would be seen as positive outcomes. And I suppose also, Chairman, would be looking to see whether you would be able to measure it against a control group to see, had this an appreciable better impact. But I would imagine it would be very much about who would want to actually avail of it. I mean, the LRA piloted their pre-claim conciliation service. They didn't actually restrict it to geographical. It was they promoted it quite aggressively for a period of time.
And just more an uptake and voluntary uptake rather. Yeah. Small SMEs in your voucher scheme and trial as a scheme with them, free access, I think it was to subsidised mediation support. How does that develop, or how do you roll that out?
Well, again, we haven't worked through what that might be, but I have looked at the GB departments introduced it some years ago, and actually, if you fund mediation, it could become quite costly. Yeah. And so and it would be then for the few. What the departments in England did, they funded the high quality training in 2 areas for maybe 30 people working in small SME companies. So they were then competent mediators, and you developed a pool of competent mediators and who could mediate in their own company. But as you know, somebody who has a problem probably won't trust the person. Is that they then, on a pro bono basis, somebody from within the network could provide that mediation, and that seemed to work well. So what it is about is developing, I suppose, a capacity and a capability to deliver mediation, hopefully, potentially on a pro bono basis. But it doesn't stop then, if mediation works well, companies realising that this is actually a valuable way to go. I mean, mediation is already used and paid for on a commercial basis, but where we were talking about is through the LRA, that it would not be on a commercial basis, but it's how best you extend the service to as many small employers as you can.
Okay, Stanley.
Thank you, Chair. In your report, it says that the review takes account of other processes, and not just in the rest of the United Kingdom, but Republic of Ireland and international. And Tom, could you maybe outline what you've come up with to date, your conclusions to date? Would some of those conclusions come from other international jurisdictions? And particularly, I was thinking about stop the watch, stop the clock situation. Could you maybe explain a wee bit more about that? I'm just wondering, how do you start the clock and how do you stop it?
Well, this is the expert in clock segment. I'm going to ask for it.
In terms of the alternative to stop the clock first and then the international, the stop the clock would be about whenever somebody applies to an industrial tribunal, there's a specified time limit in the legislation, usually 3 months, but in certain cases 6, where they have to get their claim in. So the idea would be that whenever the early conciliation starts, that time limit is paused in order for the early conciliation to proceed, so that somebody isn't disadvantaged in terms of applying to the tribunal. And so when the LRA contacts the person, the time limit would be paused, and then whenever the LRA either establishes from the person that they're not interested or that the conciliation doesn't succeed, or that they can't contact the person, then they would issue a certificate and they would indicate that the time limit has been unpaused and it continues, and the tribunal will then have documentation to show that that is the case. In terms of the international examples, we have liaised with our colleagues, particularly in Dublin, and there have been certain changes that they've made recently. They've gone through their own fairly fundamental review, and they've been bringing together a range of their dispute resolution services. And in fact, in some ways, that those are beginning to resemble a bit more closely what is going on here. So it's just taking into account, as we did in our earlier dispute resolution review, the best examples of, for example, the service that they use to bring people together before formal legal proceedings are brought in. And I think that that's a little bit of the idea behind the early conciliation, is that people actually have to go to this, or at least have to be offered it, so that there is an opportunity for them to explore whether the matter can be settled before it goes to a legal process.
Just on one other, I mean, we did have, we had a video conference with our colleagues in New Zealand actually on this issue, and they work on a good faith basis. It's based on the legislation. The presumption is that you will try to settle. And it's very hard to migrate a whole system in, but actually the pre-claim conciliation is very much about encouraging people to try and settle on a good faith basis, you know, with equal opportunity, and the balance of power is equally split between the employee and the employer. So, I mean, it seems to be that the pre-claim conciliation worked very well. Early conciliation is a further development of that, but it is actually it is forcing people to at least consider early resolution.
And just finally, just a question back down again. Alan, you mentioned about contacting colleagues in Dublin.
Yes.
And obviously, and this has come up before in this committee, where you have all island companies, and you have different legislation. Is there much of a difference between ours and the Republic of Ireland then?
There would be some substantial differences, and so there wouldn't be an opportunity to join it up as such. Yeah. But certainly there are lessons to be learned, and you can't, as Tom says, you know, transplant the system. But there are certain things that we can maybe learn from it. You know, the principles behind it.
Well, the fundamental difference between the Republic system and they don't have individual conciliation. And what they did is they developed a new arrangement where the legislation is stalled at the minute as it happens. It's just not. But to establish what's known as a Workplace Relations Commission, which would bring together the Labour Relations Commission, which is the equivalent of the LRA, the Equality Tribunal, the Employment Appeals Tribunal, and what would that be? That would be the body of first instance. If you've got a problem with your employer, you go to it, and they're going to introduce individual conciliation, and also offer what's known as an adjudication service, which is really the Republic's Rights Commissioner service, what happens in the Equality Tribunal, and what happens in the Employment Appeals Tribunal. Very much again about. So they came up, and actually the gentleman who was involved in the reform process, I facilitated a day with the LRA for them to talk about individual conciliation and pre-claim. So it was encouraging that actually we were passing on good practice, and they thought that the pre-claim conciliation, where through the helpline they were trained to target and understand, this sounds like one we could settle. It's about convincing the people to do that. So I suppose we've got some reinforcement that some of the things we've been doing are quite positive.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Good morning. You're welcome again. Certainly a hugely important piece of work, and taking the right approach anyway, very sensible approach. I want to go back to the points there, the Chair's earlier point in respect of you're digesting all this information now and preparing possibly some primary legislation. What would the time frame, would you imagine, to be on that?
Well, I mean, the reality of it is, for primary legislation to happen, this committee needs to be comfortable with it, and the executive needs to be comfortable with it. And so it is about the minister will have to go to the executive with specific proposals, which would agree. I mean, I at this stage have no sense. I mean, we would hope to be looking to introduce legislation in the autumn, you know, the latter part of this year. And I think the key part is the early conciliation proposal. Which is not, it requires primary legislation to change. It's the functions of the Labour Relations Agency. So this specific proposal requires primary legislation. So I mean, I'm not hedging about. I just don't know.
No, I'm thinking out loud in terms of at what stage do we invite the LRA, for example, to give us a presentation in terms of how they see it and make their presentation. We have it here clearly, but certainly that's for something we decide in the future. And other stakeholders as well, trade unions and businesses.
Okay. Okay, Tom, next section.
Okay. That takes us on then to the better regulation side of the consultation, and I'll deal first with the unfair dismissal qualifying period. We had 35. I mean, in essence, we set out the current procedure is that there's a 1-year qualifying period that before an employee can take an employer to a tribunal for unfair dismissal, and we set out a range of options, quite a significant range in the consultation document. In terms of the responses, 35 responded to this aspect of the consultation, and 20 of the 35 favoured retaining the 1-year qualifying period. 15 of the 30 favoured an increase to 2 years, and there were a variety of reasons for that. As I say, of the people who favoured it, they didn't see any evidence to indicate that there was a need to increase it. And of the 15 who favoured it, they felt that this would create greater flexibility and greater time to assess the competence of employees in the workplace. We did raise a range of options, which was about increasing the qualifying period in particular circumstances for selected groups, particularly about new employees or business startups or SMEs, or for companies that are come to invest in Northern Ireland, FDI companies, again, there was little appetite right across the piece. What people said, you're going to create a 2-tier system. I mean, it's not. There were 1 or 2 consultees that were supportive of that from their particular constituency, but mainly people said that's going to create confusion and difficulties in creating a 2-tier system. We did ask in the consultation, we presented as much evidence in the consultation document around the sort of what has been the influence of changes in qualifying periods over a period of years going back to 1986, and we asked people whether they agreed with the evidence base or did they have any evidence to bring. There was really no evidence base produced or offered to suggest that it should move to 2 years. But for some, they said that it would have no appreciable impact. If you increase it, it might create volatility. But others says that actually it's the perception or the indirect impact of that it would have in terms of building confidence and would be helpful in terms of Northern Ireland companies being competitive. Those were the general arguments. In terms of the options, Chair, the options are fairly straightforward. Retain the existing period. Retain the existing period. Except for in redundancy situations. There was one organisation suggested that you could have an exception for redundancies where and for 2 years, and that would align with the qualifying period for redundancies. Increase the qualifying period from 1 to 2 years, and the option still remains of increasing the qualifying period for selected groups, and those are the options, Chair.
Okay. Tom, in regard to, I suppose, the numbers in this, it has dropped from the first 35 consultation responses in that. Were you expecting more? Are you content with the responses you got?
The response we got to the consultation overall was 40 and 35.
Yeah.
It's a very good response because they were detailed, very detailed. I mean, we got a huge volume of paperwork, and as I say, all of the responses we can make available to the committee in whenever they need them and want them. But I mean, there's no doubts that the consultation generated a significant response. 40 responses is very good in a general response. Now, we not only did that, we obviously have been engaging with stakeholders over the last couple of years. We organised a number of conferences. Some of the stakeholders organised their own events. So there's a significant interest in this area in the whole employment law. It's probably more high profile than probably we would imagine it would have been, but it's very much in people's minds.
Well, personally, I don't like the two-tier system as well, because I think there'll be options of or ability to abuse it from moving from one to the other. In regard to SMEs being allowed to move to a 2-year qualifying period, new business startups moving to a 2-year period, what would stop a company closing down after 18 months and somebody recreating itself as a new startup?
Well, I think that was behind many of the responses about this. You're probably, I think the sense from the consultees, you're generating some, the consequences that you hadn't looked for. I mean, I think the point you made about SMEs, some people would have suggested that that's an anti-competitive measure, because if there was a ceiling, you have a 2-year qualifying period if you're only employing a certain amount of people. That might act as a disincentive to employ more, and that causes a problem in terms of the wider economy and more people moving into employment, and it'll have an impact on the issues like NEETs, and John talked about the uptake of the employment service. So I think people were saying right across the piece, other than a couple of consultees from particular, said not really in favour of the 2-year for particular groups.
Okay, Alistair.
Thanks, Chair. I think what we need in employment law is to have a simple system. So I think I agree that a differential one wouldn't be particularly positive. And I think what we also want is flexibility for employers and a business-friendly environment in Northern Ireland. Can I just ask 3 questions? First of all, is for the unfair dismissal, this requires primary legislation, is that right?
It would require primary legislation to change it, yes.
In terms of the evidence-based stuff, it's difficult to prove one way or the other whether this will have a positive or detrimental impact upon either getting growth within the economy or impacting adversely upon employees. But is a danger that we would face, not that in the past we have always had parity with the rest of the United Kingdom? So for investors who want to come to the UK, it is the same whether they go to Manchester, Glasgow or Belfast. Is where the evidence base will be apparent is if we continue to have a different system to the rest of the United Kingdom. So if suddenly GB looks more attractive for employers, then that's when the evidence base is apparent that we are lagging behind, because if there's a choice between Belfast that has a more strict regime or Glasgow or Manchester that has more flexibility for employers, then suddenly we become less attractive. And by that stage it may be too late because the gap is widening.
I mean, that's the point that's been advanced by certain consultees. And if you look back at our consultation document, we tried to explore all of. I mean, people did comment about the level of information that we did provide, because we did explore these issues in quite detail, and we looked at issues around international comparators, around what are the things that influence. I mean, in terms of employment regulation, we're the third latest regulated economy in the world, the UK, and unfair dismissal is only one element of a very large framework of employment law. And as I say, I think the considerations of particularly foreign investors are around the support structures, the skills base in a country, the road, that seemed to be the prevailing. That was the argument. So, I mean, I suppose we could do a straw poll of boards to say, would you grow your business more, but it didn't seem. We haven't any evidence base, and that hasn't come out. It's very much about perception, and the issue, obviously, with employment law, it is devolved. The argument would be is you just parity, and you don't take account of Northern Ireland's very unique economic structures.
I would never argue for party's sake, otherwise what is the point of devolution? Yeah. But I think if suddenly, by not moving in line with other parts of the UK, if you become less competitive or less attractive to FDI, I think that is an issue where actually in that circumstance party is important. Just in terms of the responses, 20 people who responded wanted to stick to the 1 year, around about 15 wanted to move to the 2 years, fairly evenly balanced. But if you look at the organisations or the individuals who have responded, it's fairly predictable that those who wish to stay to 1 year tend to be the solicitors or the perhaps left-leaning political groups. It's the employers, the employer bodies, the job creators in society who want to move towards the 2 years. If the central plank of the programme for government is growing the economy, and the people who are responsible for actually creating jobs and growing the economy are saying to us, we think that moving to 2 years, keeping a parity with the rest of the United Kingdom will help us grow the economy, does that mean that you have a greater weighting, a greater weight given to the responses from the job creators in society, and will the Minister will have a greater weighting? And secondly, given that Invest Northern Ireland, who are responsible for getting the foreign direct investment into Northern Ireland, are saying that actually, yes, you're right, that skills is one of the primary drivers for why a company will want to come and invest in a particular region. The cost base clearly is an issue in terms of wages and in terms of how much it costs to get buildings and all that kind of stuff. But employment law and flexibility of employers is a massive component of a decision, and Invest Northern Ireland are telling us that. So does that mean that there's going to be greater weight given to those arguments in the Minister's final determination?
It's a good question. I wish my Minister was here now. I have to say, in terms of the numerical, the Minister has been always very clear about this, and actually key stakeholders, the CBI and the trade union bodies, is that it shouldn't be 20 said this and 35 said that. And actually, you're right, you've identified that a lot of the employer bodies are arguing for an increase, and some of you call lobby bodies, but trade union bodies are arguing against it. And so I think the issue for the Minister is having to balance the relative weight of that and the arguments that are made also. And I mean employer bodies have said that they give them flexibility, but there are other bodies, including CMP, talk about the potential volatility without any. I mean the unfair dismissal qualifying period has now been increased in the rest of the UK for 2 years and 2 months. Now, we do ask colleagues in BIS about have they any evidence to show the added value to that there, and they haven't. I'm not saying there isn't, but I'm saying they haven't been able to do it. And I would imagine if they had strong evidence, they would be it'd be on the BIS website now, but there hasn't been.
Although a pipeline for FDI is in most cases much longer than 2 years, so.
It is.
It's the impact that will happen that we will see in Northern Ireland in 18 months' time or in 2 years' time. So the pipeline for FDI tends to be.
I know it's not but I mean I know that Invest have had their best probably period of time since inception. I know that's the case. So they seem to be been successful, and we haven't had any particular. And we had at times talked to Invest colleagues about this. And I don't think they were saying this is the big issue for them. I'm not minimising it, but I'm saying it hasn't been a burning issue.
Fair enough.
Okay. Phil?
Thanks very much for the presentation. I do think, personally, it's disappointing that debates and discussion on much-needed reform of employment law comes down to whether people can be sacked after a year or 2 years without being given the right to challenge that in a court. I think there's much more pressing matters that needs to be dealt with, and I would commend the Minister and the Department for the approach that's been taken to bring employers and employee representatives together to find an agreed way forward on many of those issues, and I think that's something that as a committee we probably would support. I just want to correct something that Alistair said there. He says that growing the economy is the central plank of the programme for government. Is actually not. The central plank of the programme for government is economic recovery and tackling disadvantage. The two things go hand in hand. It's not simply about growing the economy, it's growing the economy in a sustainable way that helps people least well off in our society. And I think giving people fewer rights as employees is not the way to go about doing that. It's hard enough to get people into work here without giving employers the right to sack them for up to 2 years without any good reason. So there are many things that need sorted out within employment reform. I don't think a debate on the qualifying period for an unfair dismissal claim is the big issue. From my engagements with employers, it's certainly not the big issue. There's many other issues that can be sorted out and that I'm confident will be sorted out. I think from the time I've spent looking at this, from the engagements I've had, it's clear to see that 1 year is more than adequate. It's plenty of time for an employer to find out whether their employee is fit to do the job, whether they can perform or whether they can't perform. Moving that to 2 years isn't going to give an employer any actual advantage to not get rid of that member of staff. If you haven't realised after a year that your member of staff is not fit for the job, then the problem lies with you, not the member of staff. And there's no evidence whatsoever to demonstrate anywhere that moving from a 1 year qualifying period to a 2 year period has helped to grow the economy in any way, and it certainly hasn't tackled disadvantage. And you referenced it there in your last point, that Invest NI's most successful year ever since its foundation was the year in which the qualifying period in England was 2 years, and the qualifying period here was 1 year. So, you know, it completely demolishes any argument that moving to 2 years is a strategic priority we need to help attract inward investors here or to help grow our economy.
Kind of ignore how long it takes in order to get from my initial interest to actually delivering a job, though.
I don't ignore it at all. It's not a big issue.
Members.
I have heavily engaged with groups throughout the consultation process to help formalise and submit our party responses. So the only question I want to know on the qualifying period for unfair dismissal, is there any demand within the department now to move from a 1 year period to a 2 year period? Or are you satisfied that a 1 year period is a satisfactory position?
Well, I mean, the Minister hasn't taken a decision. There'll never be a demand within the department. It's the Minister's decision based on his consideration of the evidence from the public consultation. And just on the point you made about the employers. I mean, the Minister has made a commitment in terms of the Employment Law Review that it should be a review that meets the needs of employers and at the same time protects the rights, and it's getting that balance, and that's where the Minister's position. So that's any decision he's taken will be predicated on that. So there's no demand. It's very much the Minister. He hasn't taken a decision. He wanted to come to the committee to get the sense from the committee, and he'll obviously want to go to the executive on what is if not a cross-cutting, it is cross-cutting, a sensitive issue.
I'd get a pile of sense from this committee.
No, you'll get the sense. You'll just get both senses. That's the
No, it'll just not be any sense.
For 3 months.
It'll be nonsense.
Tom, we'll forward you the Hansard anyway to forward on to the Minister. Do you want to move collective redundancy?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. We obviously the consultation looked at some changes to the consultation periods for collective redundancies. It has been changed in the rest of the UK since I think April of last year. We looked at a range about whether retaining or moving to change. In terms of the responses, a third of the responses wanted to retain the current arrangements, which is at its 90 days for any redundancies, collective redundancies of 100 plus. A third favoured a reduction to a 45-day consultation period for collective redundancies involving 100 plus, and that is the current arrangement in the rest of the UK. And a further third were firmly of the view that a minimum consultation of 30 days should apply for collective redundancies of more than 100 employees. And I would say, in terms of benchmarking, I mean, it's 45 days in the rest of the UK. It's 30 days in the Republic, and we have 90 days. So as I say, we've a unique system at this stage in terms of the rest of the UK and the Republic of Ireland. A number were in favour of deferring. I mean, we asked issues around, particularly around the issue of what constitutes an establishment, and that has come out on some fairly fairly sensitive cases where. A company has a range of outlets, particularly a UK-based company, a range of outlets, and makes redundancies. And whether the establishment was the physical location where the redundancies happened, or was it the totality of the company's operation. And a number where we asked questions about whether we should update the guidance and basic case law, and a number were said we need to have greater clarity about how the case law operates in practice, and that case law being further tested. A small majority of the respondents who responded on the fixed term working element of it felt that the inclusion of fixed term employees in collective redundancy did represent gold plating of it. So to include people who are on fixed term contracts in the collective redundancy scheme, that was gold plating. And most who commented felt that the balance between legislation and guidance, we asked questions around whether we should legislate or we should just actually develop better guidance, that felt the balance between legislation and guidance was about right, and they were in favour to varying degrees of the need for stronger guidance and maybe a code of practice that would be developed that would, because in terms of the Chairman, and the collective redundancies, we did run a number of events, and one of the things coming out of it was the quality of the consultation period. So there's the length of it and there's the quality of it, and there was a great attention towards the quality of it, and said it needs to be right. And quality can be down to actually organisations not just experienced in doing it and need support, and so there was I suppose an appetite that there should be better guidance to help companies and the representatives of employees to ensure that consultation process was of a high quality. In terms of the policy options, retain the existing arrangements, reduce the current 90-day minimum for redundancies of 100 or more to 45, but with retaining the 30-day for the redundancy between 20 and 100. Apply a minimum consultation period of either 30, 45 or 60 days for all redundancies of where more than 20 employees are being made redundant. Establish in guidance or legislate a definition for establishment. Develop a code of practice which would develop a positive relation between the employer and the employees' representatives, or legislate or develop guidance in relation to the handling of fixed-term contracts and collective redundancy. Those are the options that have come out of the consultation process.
Dom, just maybe can you expand further on the fourth point, the definition of establishment? How?
I think it came. I mean, I'm looking at the case law. It's on the. It was the case of Usdaw versus Woolworths, where they were making people redundant in affecting a particular outlet of Woolworths, and the company argued that the establishment was that particular outlet. I mean, if the consultation period, if you're making over 100 people redundant at the minute, that's a 90-day consultation period. But if you're making over 100 in 5 outlets, you're not hitting the 100 threshold in one single. That would negate the need for a 90-day consultation reduction. So it is around that issue of what you define as establishment. Is it? It's the totality of the company's operations and outlets is the establishment. So if you make 130 in 17 outlets, there's a 90-day consultation, or is it the establishment is the single outlet? That would mean either there's no, you're not even the 30-day consultation, and definitely not the 90-day consultation.
And what's the current status in GB and ROI in regard to establishment? In terms of the Usdaw case, it was suggesting that the establishment was the totality of
of it. But that's been challenged, as you can understand. Multinationals are challenging. The case law is not settled on this. In terms of in the Republic of Ireland, they have their consultation period is 30 days, irrespective of the number. So it isn't an issue. They have 30 days. So if you're making people redundant, you consult for 30 days.
And regarding the fixed term contracts being brought into collective redundancy situation, what's the pros and cons from the department's point of view for that?
Well, it's the pros and cons for the stakeholders. It's not for the department. I mean, the department doesn't have a particular view. It's what will work properly and what's appropriate. It is, from an employer, if you bring fixed-term people on fixed-term contracts into the process, there is a cost. There's no doubts about that. People who are on fixed-term contracts for 5 years. From an employee perspective, it certainly enhances their position in any redundancy. So that's the balance, and you can understand that's why there was there were a small number of employees felt that in bringing them in represented gold plating, and you can imagine what that means. It adds costs in terms of the directive.
Okay, members. Okay, Tom. Compromise agreements.
Yeah. The current arrangement in Northern Ireland is that you can have a dispute settled using a compromise agreement, and in the rest of the UK they have moved to actually renaming them settle agreements, but they actually broadened the policy remit that underpins those settlement agreements. In terms of the responses here in Northern Ireland, the general view was that compromise agreements work well in Northern Ireland, and that was right across the piece. Employers, employee representative bodies, everybody said they work well, they're appropriate. When we talked about actually moving to a protected conversation, the compromise agreements and the discussions around it are not admissible in a tribunal, because you reach an agreement, you sign a compromise agreement. But actually, the consultation looked at introducing protected conversations, which would be about widening the remit of that policy area, and actually allowing for those protected conversations to happen where a dispute doesn't exist. Currently under it's where a dispute, employment dispute, exists. This would be about where they don't exist. Now, the advantages were that it could promote realistic discussions about issues around performance, around retirement, around a range of issues. The disadvantages were that it creates an imbalance in favour of employers, and that it could lead to abuse and discrimination, where evidence then couldn't, the person who felt they were being discriminated or their rights being infringed, couldn't use that information in a tribunal hearing. So I think coming out of it, even from in the employer side, on the way in which the settlement agreements now operate in the rest of the UK, there can be a settlement or discussions around a settlement agreement where a dispute doesn't exist. But if there's impropriety in the process around a dismissal issue, or there's a discrimination issue, the person can then take that to a tribunal. So I think from employers, it probably is going to create more hassle than it was. That would have seemed to be from the responses. In terms of the options, retain the existing arrangements, change the name, and that was something we actually consulted on with key stakeholders when the UK government were doing that, and people were saying we're fairly relaxed about it. The minister decided not to, because the UK government changed the policy as well, and he hadn't consulted on it. Go for parity with GB, which is you've moved to settlement agreements, but there are those changes in around it can happen, and the discussions can happen where a dispute doesn't arise. And the further option is to extend the inadmissibility protections under compromise agreements to negotiations leading to terminations where no dispute exists. Those are the options.
Some of the concerns then again raised by respondents as further satellite litigation in connection to any change that would happen here. How do you come or negate that?
Well, as I say, those references to what has happened in the rest of the UK, where if somebody has a discussion where a dispute doesn't exist, which could lead to an unfair dismissal, and they couldn't then, the employee use that, it's inadmissible in a tribunal. But if they said the process was that there was impropriety in the process, or this conversation was happening because they were discriminating me because of a certain circumstance, they would go to a tribunal, and that's creating almost satellite tribunal litigation, determining whether the process was an improper process, even before you got to the substance of the issue. So I think those are the concerns that people have, is that, I mean, we have a situation in Northern Ireland where there was always concern about the backlog of tribunal cases and a welter of cases and the cost of it, and I think this came from a range of stakeholders.
Members? Okay, Tom, public interest disclosure law.
Everybody's running out of energy on this subject. I can understand. Yeah, the public interest disclosure. This really was around. There's a loophole identified by the UK government in the legislation, where actually public interest disclosure is about whistleblowing in the public interest, and we asked questions around whether the loophole should be closed where actually the matter relates to somebody's personal work contract. Now, in terms of the responses, there was strong support for the proposal to close the loophole that currently allows someone to use the protections of the legislation where the matter relates to their personal work contract, and that disclosure must be in the public interest. There was strong support for that. Opinion was divided in relation to the proposal that disclosures could be made otherwise in good faith. You know that there wouldn't be the good faith test. So there was quite a divided view on that. There was strong support for amending the legislation to bring National Health Service workers within the scope of the legislation. They were inadvertently not included in it, and that has been on that's been on the statute books for a very significant period of time. And there was strong support for making employers vicariously liable for detriment caused to a whistleblower, that in terms of any detriment that happened to that person who genuinely whistleblowed on something that was in the public interest. In terms of the policy options, close the legal loophole, amend the law that disclosures are protected even if not made in good faith, amend the definition of worker to include the National Health Service workers who are inadvertently removed from the public interest disclosure protections, make employers vicariously liable for detriment experienced by a whistleblower at the hands of colleagues, and develop a statutory code of practice or less formal. And I mean, with all of the work that we're doing, the whole issue of whether you should, is it to legislate or develop better guidance is an issue. So that last option is about strengthening guidance and whether a statutory code of practice would give a stronger effect to the spirit of the legislation.
Okay. Well, I think the one obvious one to me is actually to amend the definition to include the NHS workers. Like that. So, is that not a given?
I'm happy that that's on the answer. I mean, I'm in a sort of difficult position. I'm here to give you the options. The Minister has not taken decisions. I can't, I'm giving you what the consultation is saying, but I'm very happy to receive.
Had you any objections to include NHS workers?
Minister?
Okay. Members, anybody else in the whistleblowing section? Tom? Okay.
I think that's it.
That's us. Yep.
Okay.
Have you anything in general, Tom, or in general, just in summing up next stages, or?
Well, just in terms of it, I say, we'll obviously go back to the Minister on the basis of this engagement. We'd really appreciate if in the interim the committee has any views when they, I presume, when you review the Hansard review session, and we're happy to come back at any stage as we go through what has been a fairly extensive process, and it will continue to be that. And if it leads to legislation, obviously the committee will be engaged at any stage.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Al. Okay, members, any other business? Okay, members, if not, date and time, place, next meeting, 10 a.m, Wednesday, 11th of June, room 29, Parliament Buildings.
Well chaired, Mr.